Thank you all for joining a roundtable discussion on queer inclusivity in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. I'm so excited to have a faculty roundtable and to be able to highlight what we do here at UCA, what's already in-house and what we're able to provide our students. And I think so many folks don't really know or understand how much we can provide here, and so I want to highlight that for everyone. I'm Dr. Taine Duncan. I'm the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies and director of Gender Studies. I'm also really fortunate that I was able to be the PI on an American Philosophical Association Diversity and Inclusiveness grant that allowed for the programming this month for LGBTQ History Month in this space, along with some other resources. Just to give a little bit of an overview to the Lavender Library itself for folks who might be watching this on video later, and just in case you haven't had as many opportunities to explore this space since it's relatively new too. The Lavender Library is an academic resource center that opened up this last year. And the Academic Resource Center for LGBTQ plus related materials for scholarship, for books, for roundtable discussions, for students to come and to be able to talk about what LGBTQ plus inclusion looks like on a college campus. That had been a dream for over a decade. We were finally able to make it happen, due in large part and with many, many thanks to Dr. Jamie Stone. So Dr. Stone recognized and realized that there was a unique opportunity through the residential colleges and learning communities here at UCA to provide some space, to provide some resources, including a student worker and including Carl, Mr. Olds here, as the academic director of Muse Residential College. And she also recognized and realized that there was this perfect intersection of the academic side and student outreach that happened in a learning community that is a little bit more challenging to achieve in a lot of other places on campus. The other great thing about founding the Lavender Library through the residential colleges or learning communities is that it means that this is something that students see when they first come to UCA. So our first year students that are moving into Muse Residential College, one of the very first things they see is that Muse is an affirming place for them, and that there are resources that are available for them, not only as a person, but also as a scholar, to treat LGBTQ plus history, literature, philosophy, writing, music, right, to treat all of these disciplines seriously as well. And they get a chance to see that in this space. We also have a free library model here. So the Torreyson Library has also been a great supporter of this space, and they helped us to write guidelines for establishing a free collection. Now, the reason why that was really important in this space is that, one, for many students, they might not feel super comfortable checking out books and materials that have to do with a part of their identity that they're still exploring. We found a lot of students didn't know that they could look for those materials in the library, or didn't feel comfortable checking them out. They didn't want to go on record. And here they can come, they can take materials out of this space. There's no record kept of anybody taking those materials. The second thing that the free lending library provides is materials that can be used up. So things like workbooks, like the My Gender workbook. The library at Torreyson can't provide resources like that based on state law, but we can provide those that students can take, can fill out, can pass along to someone else, right, et cetera. So every single book in this space has been something that has been donated thus far, either through direct donations where people brought in some of their old books, or we have an Amazon wish list. So you can also purchase books there. We also invite students to add requests to the Amazon wish list. And it's something else that we're going to be able to use the grant funding after all of the speakers are finished this year. That's left actually gets to go to help develop the rest of that collection. So it's really exciting that it's this academic resource center. The other thing that makes the Lavender Library very unique is that as an academic space, we get a little bit more protection over some other spaces on campus. And so we can really talk about sensitive topics and issues in ways that might be increasingly challenging for other offices on campus. It also made it really important for us to think about how we could make sure to ensure funding and resources for this space. And so we've been working through the foundation on grants and also to do some foundation fundraising in order to make it possible to still provide all of these resources, as we know that there are going to be challenges that are only going to increase over the next couple of years with a lot of the things that we do. So that's the big background to the space, and to kind of set the tone for why it's so important that each of you are here on campus and in this space today. And so now I think I want to just invite each of you to introduce yourself a little bit. I'm going to start in my left.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us here today. Dr. Duncan has done so much for the space and for the culture on campus. I'm Paige Rose. I'm the Associate Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And I think one of the most important things that our college does is support guests to come into campus and bring that research and artistry to our students and spend quality time with them, sometimes even in Lavender Library. So we do have an artist in residence program, and in fact, one of the colleagues here today has brought in someone that we all may be familiar with, Kim Chi, who's a drag artist and was able to come last year. And so we're seeing more and more people visit who have such a vested interest in our community, bringing all sorts of people together, all sorts of backgrounds, and not just a really insular topic. Also, we have something called Keystone Conversations, which has just started with the building of our new Wingate Center for the Fine and Performing Arts. And I think that's been really just a monumental step toward bringing some very informal conversations right out into the open with topics that really can be anything under the sun. So we look forward to seeing how that can marry with our population here on campus really soon, as it's a brand new series that's been around for about a year now. The other thing I do is a professor of music with a specialty in music education. So those classroom ties are important to me and what I do now.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Adele Okoli. I am Associate Professor of French in affiliation with African American Studies and Gender Studies programs. I have my PhD in French and African American Studies from Yale University, and I'm part of the School of Language and Literature here at UCA, and we host a big variety of programs. So we have English, we have the intensive English program, we have French, Chinese, Spanish, and linguistics, and there's also a German minor program that is unfortunately being sunset, but it is still here with us now. But we really, we offer a lot of courses where you can learn different languages, where you can use languages once you know them to think critically about literature and cultural production. So in French, I specialize in discourses of race, gender, and desire in the French-speaking and Creole-speaking Atlantic world, particularly Haiti, Louisiana, and 19th century France. So I'll tell y'all a little bit more about that later, but I think that's enough about me.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Hillary Anderson. I'm in the history department. I'm listening to y'all talk about all the programs, so I'm trying to make sure I promote my own department well enough. But my education, my PhD is from Texas A&M University in history and women's and gender studies certificate and expertise in African American studies. Our department, I'm the coordinator for the BSc program, so people who want to be social studies teachers at the secondary level come through our department. And we also house several sub-programs that I think are really interesting and definitely hit on the intersectionality of queer studies, which we're going to get into later. The Asian Studies program is housed in the History Department. The African American Studies Department is housed there. Southern Studies, and we also have the Public History program, which gets our history majors into like working at museums and being tour guides and stuff like that at national parks services and things. Class-wise, I teach I'm an Americanist. I do the cool 20th century, like mostly the super radical politics after World War II stuff. I did develop a queer history class of the United States just for UCA, and now it's officially on the books. But I also teach a history of sports in America, which includes definitely queer history. I teach a recent U.S. history class, which is 1960 to present. And I teach music and identity politics class, which also we cover queer music history in that class as well. So there's lots of opportunities to learn more through that department.
I'm Dr. Cristine Busser. I am in the School of Communication. Specifically, I teach in writing, rhetoric, and information design. But the School of Communication also houses public relations, journalism, communication, and then two kind of first-year programs, first-year writing and principles of communication, so 6 programs altogether. I also have the title of the first-year writing coordinator. So I am in charge of the first-year writing class or program, which is actually 2 classes. And it's the only universal requirement that students kind of need to take in college. So that is also my research discipline. Writing program administration is a sub-discipline of rhetoric and composition. And a lot of my work, my research, kind of focuses on how to run that program and how to kind of ask questions about how to serve first-year students, particularly intersects quite a bit with conversations around student retention, which is what my research focuses on. I got my PhD at Georgia State University. That's all I got for an introduction.
It's really incredible to hear how many different things each of y'all is involved in on campus. I mean, I think that's something else that is really a highlight or a strength of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences in general is that we tend to be one of the first places, right, that students interact with on campus. And that means that we're also in a really unique position to help out with things like retention, to help out with things like affirmation, right, and to help out with things like encouraging their creativity and original scholarship. And I'm really excited to hear how much like overlap, but also unique ways that we all touch that too. It's fun to hear how much it intersects between gender studies and African American studies in all of our departments, for example, and to see the ways in which intersectionality is clearly a really important part of what we do on campus. I think that's really important to think about in this space too. When we're talking about LGBTQ plus history and scholarship, we're not just talking about that as though it's a separate discipline, right? We're talking about it as though it intersects with all of these other disciplines and intersects with all of these different identities. So I loved hearing all that and getting that kind of validated. I'd love to give you a chance to dig in a little bit more into exactly what it is that you do and what you research and what types of not just classes you're teaching, but your approach to teaching, right? I know, for example, for you, Dr. Busser, this is going to be really important because your approach to teaching is so intertwined with the idea of inclusivity and making sure that students feel that sense of belonging. So I want to kind of maybe start with you and then come back this time and just hear a little bit more about your teaching and research and how those things kind of are connected to each other for you.
Sure. So as I mentioned, my research focuses on student retention, and it was inspired by getting my PhD at a school that is really nationally known for raising its retention rates using lots of famous, well-published initiatives, one being big data. And so I was attending this school, and I was finding myself as a teacher, first-year writing, implicated in these initiatives that often intersect with the first year of school. When people talk about student retention, they want to meet students their first semester, and the One Universal course is my course to meet students. And so I found myself teaching in a freshman learning community, didn't even know it, wasn't even told, but all my students were studying nursing. And what I observed as a PhD student at the time was that it was not only intersecting with my work, but my students were quite critical of the initiatives that they were finding themselves in. I walked in on them all planning to boycott a class of theirs. And I was like, what's this? And eventually it turned into my research topic, which was really investigating the priorities that are behind these initiatives. And one of the things that I found in at least my dissertation research was that the priority is often efficiency and the economy. And so getting students in and out quickly, which is, as a queer person with a queer lens, it screams conformity. And you need a student who attends in a very traditional manner to really have those initiatives work. So aligning scholarships with 15 credits, for example. And so I was starting to really ask questions about who this puts aside. And there are many identities that intersect with who it sidelines, but the main ones that stood out to me at the time were low-income students, commuters, and non-traditional students. So my research kind of focuses on that, and it also inspires my work, which is to look at how to lead a program and prioritize a program that can support students as individuals and support their trajectories as individual trajectories. And so it informs all kinds of stuff that I do with regard to professional development for faculty. My teaching, I think, reflects that priority of individualization. There's a lot of my students, I think what stands out to them a lot is that I don't leave them alone. I go to their desks a lot, but I think I'll forever be reflecting on how to articulate my philosophy, but it is very much about supporting their goals and supporting their expression. But in the first year classroom, I want to be as accessible as possible to them, and provide them, we're often their first impression. And even though my specialty is writing, it is also university representative, right? Who needs to kind of know the resources and all these other things and be a support to them in what is a very hard year of transition that kind of sparks a lot of mental health issues. So I'm gonna wrap up there, I think, for a second, but yeah, that's an introduction to what I focus on.
I'm loving getting to know so much more about what y'all do. This is such a great opportunity for me too. I have so many thoughts. Thank you for sharing that so far. I'm going to have some follow-up questions when we get to the discussion.
Well, I think the way that I came to my research is so important to how I approach my classes. So I guess I plan when I talk about those two things together. I didn't plan to go to graduate school. I never did. I thought I was going to be a teacher, and sophomore year of college, one of my favorite professors wrote on one of my papers, "Have you ever considered grad school?" And I was like, she's nuts. Mm-hmm. But then I taught for a while, and when I got done and with my undergrad degree and taught, I kind of missed being a student and went back. And I realized how much those things are related, so it goes with how I approach the way that my class is set up, because I felt different. I felt like things weren't exactly for me, and so I wanted to make a class that was not necessarily for me, but like would make more people feel like it was for them. And it was kind of a whim when I went to graduate school, and a lot of people are like, I'm going to study this thing, and I found this one document, and I'm just going to jump off there. Like, they're really focused, and I was like, I'm kind of interested in Black feminism, which is super general. And my advisor was like, you got to narrow it down, you got to narrow it down, you got to narrow it down. But what I found in the exploration was kind of a search for myself and to be able to articulate questions of how identities form within us and without us in my research. And so my research, to speak specifically about it, is related to the lesbian feminist activism in the broader national movement for gay rights. And it focuses mostly on the 1970s, but in the broader literature of feminism in general, I think often the South gets written out. And gay history tends to be on the coast or in the big cities. So I wanted to find out what was going on at an intersection of race, gender, and what I found class, but also regionally located, which I think the South is related to how people understand gender and how it's expressed. So when I think about my classes, when they interviewed me here, they said, "What class would you develop?" The very first one I said was the queer history of the United States. And I think when my students take the queer history class, they're like, "I thought this was going to be more gay history." And then when they take other classes that's not named queer history, they're like, "This is a lot of queer history." And it's like, because it's all together. So I think students have, when they come here, they have an idea that LGBTQ plus topics are recent, maybe sociology, like it's recent within the last 15 years or whatever. And philosophy, as I love, and I'm into the theory. I was challenged by that in grad school, but I think it's definitely useful. But I think students are also like, philosophy sounds really deep and theoretical, and there's not a practical application for it. And that's where I think history fills the void, where there's practical context for how we got here. And I think queer history in particular lets us pull at questions of power and who has the right to record history and how it gets recorded, or why it might not be recorded in traditional ways. And we can ask all of those questions, because I think a lot of students don't understand the intersectionality of what is happening. Like, the Vietnam War had something to do with gay rights? Yes, it did. Sports has to do with gay rights or queerness? Yes, it does. And I think going back further, what I find, especially in my queer history class, students are interested in other interpretations of gender. And that's what queer theory allows me to do, is once you get out of the binary, and it's not just about gender and it's not just about sexuality, like, you stop thinking in terms of like one or the other. Like the Cold War. Let's stop thinking about the Cold War in binary terms, not just the United States and the Soviet Union. Like, what's Cuba doing? What do they think? Like, you kind of drop so many assumptions, and I think that's the exciting part in the classroom. That you drop so many assumptions and then start asking your own questions. And I think the students can really find themselves there. Because when I, going back to myself as a student, I think that's what I wanted to see. I was like, if I lived in the past, what would I have been doing? What movements would I have joined? Who would I have fit in with? And asking those questions and get the students to ask those questions, I think helps them with their own research, but also reflect on themselves in a way that is, I think, open and safe for them to do. So, I don't, and I guess that's related to retention.
Yeah.
It definitely is related to retention, because a lot of my students have said, I didn't know that, or I didn't feel seen or heard until I read this thing, or I saw this thing, and that's the reason they stay. So,
once they find that sense of belonging and the sense that their perspective and who they are matters, right? Then they know that they can stay too. Yeah. I think it's fantastic to hear that, both that you had this very kind of personal journey to developing your teaching and your research, but also that personal journey gives you a lens with which to understand the students. and maybe help them to understand themselves a little bit better too. And I do critical theory, which is all about the intersection of theory and practice. So
I advise my students to take class all the time.
I just realized the computer fell asleep while we were doing this, so I'm going to go ahead and wake this back up for Dr. Okoli for the next part. There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of points of intersection among all the work that we're doing, and something that I was thinking about as you were just speaking was this idea of a queer Southern diaspora that we've all kind of refused, the exodus that happens. I think that we all probably consider at some point, like I'm originally from East Texas, I moved here from New Orleans. I consider myself a very Southern person in terms of my formation and a lot of cultural constructions that I operate within and sometimes against. But after having spent some time in Connecticut for graduate school, as well as living abroad in Paris at 2 different points of time in my life, and there was also Miami period, I decided that I really wanted to come back to the South, and I wanted to be someone that stays. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes. I thought when it came to my teaching, I would show more than I would tell. So I actually brought like a little clip from a French movie that's 89 years old to talk about how I would have a discussion with students about it. But anyway, a verb that I was thinking about in terms of this decision to stay and to be in what is a geopolitically marginalized position within the queer community or within queer history in American historiography. It's the verb succomber, which is where camp comes from. And of course, as a femme, queer person, I love campy stuff and I engage in really campy behavior sometimes. But in French, succomber is a political word. It's a standing up in a very assertive way that's to take up space. So in a lot of political organizing contexts, you'll hear lever camper in Haitian Creole, for example, too. Stand up and then stand up in a way, get up, stand up, plant yourself there and do not yield that territory, take up the space. And so I feel like we're all doing that in different ways for our students and also for ourselves through our research and teaching. So something I was thinking about in terms of my journey to being someone that I would say I'm a pluridisciplinary and interdisciplinary humanities scholar, primarily in French studies and Creole studies, right? But the word that I kept coming back to is conjunction. And this resonates very strongly for me as someone that defines as bisexual. And I know it's a dusty old term that a lot of the kids don't like these days. No, I do not believe in a gender binary. For me, bisexual, it means that I'm attracted to people of my own gender as well as others. That's what it means to me. And I like the historicism of the term because we have always been here. And I like using the term that people before us used as well. I don't feel a need that I need, that I want to step away from it. I affirm those that have a different perspective and experience than me. But that, for me, is about conjunction. It's this and this. Mm-hmm. And cultivating multilingualism in myself and in others and in my students in a place that is all about trying to force people to assimilate into English and to force assimilation into other scripts that are heteronormative, that are xenophobic and all of these things. I'm saying, no, let's live in the conjunction. Come live in the conjunction with me. I can't imagine having my life in only one language. I can't imagine having my life being attracted to only one gender. It's just part of who I am very deeply. And I thank Dr. Duncan for asking us to reflect a little bit. And I was like, hey, I think I'm on to something. Why did I get into French and why do I like to learn other languages? But also part of the learning process, whenever you decide that you're going to learn another language that you weren't born into, you have to embrace a position of marginality that I think we're all very accustomed to. Like that's one of our default settings. But to learn another language, you have to, for a long time, be at the margins of every conversation. You have to be comfortable being the stupidest person and saying the dumbest things, making mistakes all the time, failing. So I think of Jack Halberstam and Queer Failure. You have to just lean into that, and that is the only way that you're ever going to get better. And so whenever I'm teaching, I try to really cultivate a learning environment where students know that it's safe to be in conjunction. It's safe to push yourself out into the margins in order to learn and expand and grow, and to have another way of seeing the world, which is what another language really is. So those are all things that I think drew me to French studies, to Creole studies, because I also speak Haitian Creole fluently, and to the way that I approach literature and culture as a historicist scholar. I work on a lot of visual culture. As an undergraduate, my majors were French, English, and art history, and I minored in history and Italian studies. Okay, so thinking also about being in occupying spaces that you have a feeling they're not built for you, that's something that Dr. Besser brought up that really spoke to me as well. That was my experience as a full scholarship student at Tulane University as well as at Yale University. There were very elite spaces that I knew were not built for me. And so, you know, thinking about having those marginality kind of leading positions, how you can bring those experiences into the center, how you can build community through those shared experiences. So as a historicist scholar, I think a lot about queer atavism. So atavism is this affiliation with ancestors, and I even brought up our ancestors right before we started this because I'm always thinking about that, how we have always been here, and I'm trying to, in a lot of my research, kind of recover these kind of identities that you can always see peeking through, but didn't necessarily have the same legibility or get the same kind of attention or, yeah, attention is a good word, scholarly attention or attention in teaching. So I wanted to show y'all an example of how I might have students in my Creole Atlantic seminar, which is one of 19 courses I have taught at UCA, so I'm not going to list them all. This is one of my favorite courses that I teach. This is a film from, I don't know where it's going to show. Are we just watching it?
So it actually should show back on the TV too. You might have to hit the power button again on the TV. I think it also went to sleep for some reason.
Oh, okay. Wake up.
I know.
Okay, so just to introduce this a little bit, this is a film from 1934 called Zouzou. It stars Josephine Baker, who was an openly bisexual queer icon of her day in interwar France. She's originally from St. Louis, Missouri. She rose to be really the Beyonce of her day. She was worldwide famous level. She was a darling of French cinema. She was a singer, she was a dancer, she was an activist, she was an actress. She's actually now interred at the Panthéon. She is the only woman of African descent that sits with her remains in the Panthéon in Paris. That's reserved for, it's the highest honor for heroes of the French nation. That's because she was a French resistance spy, and she also helped save the lives of many Jews during the occupation of France. So this film is directed by a queer guy named Allégret. He was the lover of André Gide. And so I think about this as a queer collaboration. It also stars Jean Gabin, who is like everywhere in interwar French cinema. So he's just kind of there bumbling along as her co-star. But basically, this movie is funny because on its surface, it's about a failed, it's an unrequited love story where Josephine Baker's character, Zouzou, loves Jean Gabin's character, Jean, their original name. But that doesn't work out for her. I see this movie as being about her desire for Claire, who is her friend in this very homosocial work environment and social environment where they are laundresses. And then Josephine Baker's character, Zouzou, goes on to be a star. But she goes on to do that by her imitation of a white star in a musical review. And I see this as a drag performance, as a bio-drag performance of race and of campy femme gender. So the way that she is able to perform that shtick, and then it works for her to the extent she actually replaces the original star. So I'm gonna play a few of the clips very shortly, and if you would like, we could talk about them together, but you can probably imagine some of the discussion questions I might ask students. I think the sound is connected. She's about to perform her imitation, her impression of Baba Va, who is the other star. She's got a request from her colleagues.
Of course, the Wi-Fi does.
Yes.
Okay.
About to cut to Baba Va, who is singing her version of the song. This was a hit song in the 1930s. Yeah. This is unfortunate. Maybe I should just let it. What do you think, Dr. Duncan?
Hit pause once and then hit play again. Sometimes that'll reinitiate it. Sometimes. Now,
Alright, it's fine. Y'all got maybe a tiny snippet. I think you could probably see with the same kind of eyes that I'm seeing what's happening here. And so whenever you think about something like drag, right, you would, every academic article about drag always cites Judith Butler and the performativity of gender, and this is really on display here almost 100 years ago. So yeah, that's just an example of a kind of primary text that I might introduce to students, and we could have all kinds of interdisciplinary conversations, and gender would be formation of gender, performance of gender, and sexuality would be very central to those conversations in French. And I hope you completely ignored all of those subtitles because that was complete trash. That's not what they were saying.
I was trying to follow it.
No, it was completely, yeah,
they're trash subtitles.
they're trash. All right, well, I think I can talk more later about my research, but that's enough for now.
All right. Well, much like Dr. Anderson, I taught for 7 years, and I can honestly say that in my teacher training and all throughout teaching, I don't think there were ever many conversations, if any. I don't think any queer topics ever came up. So I think I almost found myself searching for more, not only in topics that we discussed today, but just in general, you know. So going back for a master's degree, I kind of serendipitously found a great gender studies program at McNeese State University, and you know, in the 1 year I was actually in residence and not teaching, Lillian Fairman was there, and I started some research on Kathleen Lee Bates and America the Beautiful, and yeah. And yeah, so I, you know, and at the time I was thinking, oh, I don't know who this is, but cool. You know, so that's I think is a primary example of why we need more in our educational systems, at least In college, we have, of course, all of the barriers to public schools, but I think that research really spawned a theme in my overall research, and these things have to get into the curriculum. And the perfect example is, we're just now as a community, and I mean the broader community, talking about Bernstein with the upcoming movie and the trailer that's just been released. I would say, unless you're sitting in a music history class, you probably don't get a lot of the history of great composers and performers. Case in point, we have some icons, but on the whole, there are so many more artists that are in the queer community we don't know about because we've never been told. We often joke that music history has far too long been about dead white guys. And that's true. We need to talk about the living. We need to talk about inclusive topics. And so one of the things that I've tried to do in general is talk about when you perform things, first of all, program things that are not all by the same people, that have composers that have never been heard of. One of the saddest things I think I saw was a post just a little bit ago, maybe a year ago, and a student said, I've gone all my life without knowing who this certain composer was of color. And she said, I never knew, and how terrible that is. So programming, and then putting things about our community in program notes, because like somebody said a few minutes ago, it has everything to do with their music and with their livelihood. And when you leave it out and you divorce it, you don't bring in that intersection of music and politics and art and everything that's happening. Case in point, I've never heard this piece until today, but Dame Ethel Smith composed, who was very out, even in 1911, the March of the Women, which had a lot to do with marching for the right to vote. And it was dedicated to her partner, who at the time was a big icon of that movement. And I'll just read one of the verses. Long, long, we in the past, cowered in dread from the light of heaven, strong, strong, stand we at last, fearless in faith and with sight new given, strength with its beauty, life with its duty. Hear the voice, oh, hear and obey. These beckon us on. Open your eyes to the blaze of the day. So I think that's got some double meaning as well.
Yeah.
But so I think that has allowed me to impart to students, make it your job to include all of these people from the past, homage to our ancestors and those who came before us, but also in terms of your own students. I think a lot of what I try to teach them about the students at present really comes from experience, not so much teaching and research. And so I just wanted to bring that in for a little bit. I think one of the biggest things for me, don't laugh, but coming from a straight world in a very small town and limited research and teaching on any of these topics was playing women's professional football. And to suddenly be in the midst of 30 queer women, I was exposed to so much of their life that I'd never considered, so many of the barriers they face that I didn't have to face because at the time I was very straight passing, and I never had to deal with that. And so immediately coming into a doctoral program and then centering here, I realized how many people were being excluded because of certain things, like even dress. So taking that into the classroom, how many students are you excluding because they don't want to wear a dress to be in a choir? And that's one of the first things I said when we started the Central Arkansas Children's Choir. Sorry, not started it, but I started it, was why do the girls have to wear dresses? Why do we have almost all across America that you have to don a dress to sing on the Weitzert? So that's very not inclusive. So I'm talking about things like that in our music education programs. Of course, there's a lot of time spent outside of the classroom, field trips. How do you navigate that with all that there is to explore in terms of parents, identities, etc. So last thing I'll say is we've been in the past a little bit in music education, which is what my degrees are in. And it was just 15 years ago that in one of our major journals, Louis Bergonzi from the University of Illinois wrote just a basic article on the fact that because we spend so much time outside of the normal classroom, how it's really a family oriented thing. So when a band director, for instance, goes to a football game, it's common to bring kids, spouse, etc. And he said, I could never do that at the time, even 15 years ago. I could never put pictures of my husband out on a desk and not be questioned, things like that. And there was a big uproar in the music education community just 15 years ago, and there were people writing in and saying, I'm never reading this journal again. And for such a weird thing to me, for a community of music educators who has so much LGBTQ participation, how much of the majority those people still felt. And so I felt like that was a really critical piece. It wasn't even research, it was just an opinion article. But how critical that one little thing puts a crack in the cement for talking about inclusivity. So that's just what I try to take to the classroom. And it goes into resumes. It used to be that we would have those honest conversations sort of quote unquote in the closet. You knew if you had a student who was queer, you give them your best recommendation of now. If you put this out there, if you're going to get a job, you might want to, cover your tattoos and all that kind of stuff that we used to say. And that's not what we do anymore. However, there is research that says even if you put they, them on your resume, you're 10% less likely to be looked at. So I think our job now in the classroom for preparing educators is to prepare them to be their authentic selves and understand how they can do that on resumes and job interviews, etc. And watching out for the students who are affected in certain ways. For instance, bringing it personally, my son has had a lot of problems just because he's got two moms and he's just in 5th grade and he's already been told he's going to hell quite a few times, or that he is himself gay. So I think we need to educate our educators to watch for so much. And we know that they are counselors, they are teachers, they are substitute parents sometimes, and there's a lot to lay on them, but it's time that our students were taken care of and that they also felt seen and honored in the classroom the way they need to be.
I hate hearing that experience as the kind of culmination of all of what you've done with your research and your teaching and your kind of investigations into best practices. But I hear something throughout everybody on this panel about the is it succombe?
Succombe, yes.
Succombe. It's like, oh, my French is very rusty. But that idea of taking a stand, taking a position, right? Being able to stand up, because that's not only important for the academy or for the discipline, but it's important for the community. It's important for our community. It's important for the community of the students. It's important for the community of children, right? It's important for the community as a whole. And I think I hear that as another sort of theme that's running across all of the scholarship and teaching that we see represented on this panel, is that what we're doing is not just about the confines of the classroom, right? It's about what that's going to do to change the experiences of individuals in the community and to change the community in order to help everyone feel more like they belong, more like they can participate in scholarship with us or in whatever comes next for them. I want to make sure that we get a chance to kind of plug our upcoming classes. And then any highlights of research that you just want to talk about, just a particular, you don't have to list everything that you've ever published, but any sort of publication that you want to highlight. And then I want to come back and maybe end with a little bit of a conversation to come back and see what are our next steps, maybe what are we going to do with this kind of drive that we all have to succumb. So I'm gonna mix it up a little bit and start with Dr. Anderson.
Oh.
What classes do you have that are coming up that students should be on the lookout for, maybe even this next semester?
In the spring, I'm teaching recent U.S. history, 1960 to present. I include queer history because we go through the civil rights movement, liberation movements, and intersectionalities there. We talk about the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention in 1870 because some people are like, Black Power has something to do with gay liberation.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So that one's coming up in the fall. We've changed the teaching schedule a little bit. I know I always teach the teaching social studies methods, which is a lot of related to what you were talking about, Dr. Rose, about getting our students to who will be in the classroom, like what that means for them to meet each individual student where they are. And it's not just about finding the queer students, it's about like destigmatizing difference and making, like, it's not a controversial thing to talk about. It's like, we're all here together and let's do the thing together, you know? I'll get kind of cheesy if I go.
It's
I know soon I'm teaching a music and identity politics class. That may be fall 24. And that's super fun. We can get into music stuff, which is related to my publications. So I will plug those now. My first article is called We've Had It with Anita's Brand, the Southern Lesbian Feminist Response to the Save Our Children Crusade. And it's actually about the Lesbian Concentrate album that Olivia Records put out as a response to Anita Bryant's Save Our Children from Homosexuals Crusade in 1977. So we'll talk about that obviously in my music and identity politics class. That's not the only time we get to for music in there. And then my upcoming article that I think is coming out soon. Is it okay to cuss?
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
Because it's a quote, Pat Parker. It's called "And the Shit I Caught There," Pat Parker's Texas and a Lesbian Feminist South. And she's a Black lesbian feminist poet, and some of her poetry appeared on the Lesbian Concentrate album. But I talk about her the article talks about her journey growing up in East Texas, Houston area, leaving the South and then coming back to the South once she had come out and was sort of famous in the lesbian feminist community. That should be coming out in the Journal of American Studies Association of Texas. And the first article is in an edited collection that focuses on queer history, queer community in the South. But it's interdisciplinary. So if history is not your jam, like it's got some other disciplines in there. Yeah. Did I hit all the questions?
You're good.
Okay.
Dr. Bryce, do you want to talk about any upcoming classes or maybe speakers, since I know your role as Associate Dean also means helping with some speakers?
Yeah, so teaching classes as the Associate Dean, right now I'm teaching music technology in the classroom. And so I'm excited about that because this is the first semester in a few years I've taught it. So I want to dig deeper for the spring and it's you've got to be a music major to take it, but all of this really informs what I do, especially when you talk about presence online and in any app. I could go on and on there, but it's going to really be fun to dive into that. I actually wanted to go back to a little theme that we'd all sort of talked about. You make a dent in something and you see that spiral. And I think that's what so many people have done with their research. It might not bring you to all the way from A to Z, but it gets us farther down the alphabet, right? Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite research articles I ever did was on the freedom seekers of the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about this before because I was in a music education program and it was refused as my master's thesis. So I had to punt and go to something else. And I was always in programs that were very quantitative research oriented, and I always felt myself being pulled into historical research. So as soon as I went to my doctoral program, I had a chance to write that and to rely on some time with the actual freedom singers themselves, including Charles Neblett, who was a friend of my mom. So, I think what
This is fascinating.
I know we gotta collaborate. But the takeaway for me was what came of that was not what I thought at all. I was just advocating again that theme of it's time that this music and these themes appeared in our music classrooms. And what I found is the oddest assortment. I had to go back to that article for some reason, and much to my surprise, there were some metrics on everything now on that website of the journal, and they started tabulating in 2016, but it had been read and downloaded about 2,500 times, and I thought, wow, I didn't expect that, from such a and that's probably a drop in the bucket compared to some of your research. But I've gotten some emails, and it's appeared in things I never anticipated, like the one that I looked at was let's see. New, emerging, and alternate forms of learning and knowing, perspectives to inform a more critical human rights development. And I am thinking of taking this into our topics because no matter what you think, if you become too overwhelmed, do the research, write the stuff, and get it down, because what I'm finding is so many of the stories are wrong, or they're not told at all, or they're gonna splinter off into a million different things. So for this article about the Freedom Singers to suddenly appear in COVID articles and human resource, I think I said human rights, I'm sorry, human resource development is interesting to me. And it makes me think about all the things that are wrong from the past, because there were so many attempts to cover our ancestors, our people, our community members from long ago. And case in point, there were so many things I found in the Freedom Singers research that were just not correct, that were out there. And when I would speak to somebody who was there, oh no, it didn't happen this way. This was so different from what the history books say. And we need to continue, that living history and that history living to be different from what we thought it was. And I think for our community, the queer community, there is so much work to be done. So my takeaway in all of that is just to write it down and tell the story, or someone else will tell it wrong. And aside from that, I'm just going to try to keep working on the things I've experienced, those football moments, so to speak. I understand now how important it is for people to have the right access to clothing, to healthcare, to name changes. You've done so much work in that, and I'm just happy to be a part of whatever I can do. But I am excited about the inclusive clothing drives we're doing, and hoping we can help some people there that I wish I could have helped a long time ago to feel.
And we covered the Freedom Singers in my music. I didn't call it stuff.
Sounds like y'all need to have some exchange with some, and maybe some guest lectures coming in. Dr. Busser, how about you? What classes do you have coming up?
In the spring, I'll be teaching technical writing, which is a service learning class, which is pretty cool. And then I guess I'll also plug, I'm teaching special topics for the first time next spring, which will be about spatial rhetoric, which I'm not going to pronounce this term right, but it connects back to the term that you said about, taking a stand, right? And we'll kind of look at the ways in which space is used to communicate messages. One thing that I think of is the very kind of famous stopping of highway traffic, right? To make a plan, and pride is an easy example of communicating an argument using space. So I'm excited to teach that course. I wanted to talk a little bit, so a publication that is not out yet, the title is both personal and just whatever, but anyway, it's called Harnessing Pace to Resolve Dissonance, or 1WPA's Lesson Learned from Getting Cancer During a Pandemic, and it's for a collection of lessons learned from writing program administrators during the pandemic, but the reason that the cancer is in the title is because I had to go on chemo for a year during that time, and I wrote about how my entire agenda as an administrator slowed down, because I physically slowed down, and that was actually needed. So I explored this concept of slow agency from a person named Laura Machike, and it talks about how so much of the work in WPA is about outcomes, and it's about managing a lot of top-down initiatives and negotiating them, with getting outcomes. And I have attended many a conference where a WPA has talked about, look at all these things I implemented in my program. And I sit there and I think, you don't have buy-in. But that sounds great. And so I think about, and I'm exploring in this piece, the very slow, vulnerable work required to get your faculty on board to do something new. And in our case, what the project that I took on during the pandemic was to revise 25, which is an absurd number, objectives for our first year writing course, using a newly published, newly circulated document on anti-racist first year writing goals. The work to do this and to get buy-in was very, very difficult and required slowness and vulnerability. But these objectives, we passed them, and it was such a feat. But you mentioned that narrative that we shared in music education, and kind of said that these objectives would honor that more as research, right? In the first year writing classroom, these objectives allow us to kind of reconsider what we favor as methodology, right? And they have counter narrative as part of what is valued in this class. We have a lot of the work in first year writing or WPA is really about embedding in our objectives and our policies more linguistic inclusion. Mm-hmm. But with that, needs to have discussions about privilege that comes with different language systems, and also so much emphasis on student reflection of their own voice and their own agency as a rhetorician. So these new objectives bring in so much of what wasn't there before in terms of linguistic awareness, in terms of metacognition, and more valued methodologies like counter-narrative. So I'm very excited about it, but the research that I did was about how nuanced and how difficult moving the needle can be if you are trying to make change outside of your classroom and on more of an institutional level.
No, it's such a thank you for sharing. So very excited to be writing the article today. Thank you for sharing that both and disclosing your own vulnerability in that process, but then also reminding us about that slowness. I think feeds back into what we've been talking about as well, with bringing a very explicitly kind of clear perspective to scholarship that's outside of the norm. I'm thinking about John Halberstam's and A Queer Time and Place, and the simultaneous compression of time that happens, but then also expansion of time that happens within kind of the queer approach to scholarship as well. So I think that's a really helpful reminder about all that we're doing. Dr. Okoli, I'm going to invite you to talk about your upcoming classes and highlights of your research too.
Sure. Before I start, I'll reiterate what all of us are saying in our own ways. Whether it's cracks in the concrete or talking about language systems and how we can expand them in our praxis. But there's a proverb in Haitian Creole that I think encapsulates what we're all doing, and that's "Pisser maringouin augmenter la rivière." That means even the mosquito's piss adds to the river. So we're all little mosquitoes pissing in that river. It's gonna eventually, get higher and higher, and we're all together in our own ways. Building community through our teaching and scholarship and administrative activity too. Mm-hmm. So something that I don't think I mentioned earlier regarding my approaches to teaching language in particular, because that's not the majority of the kind of teaching that I tend to do. But next semester I am teaching, and a lot of times I teach some intermediate language in French. And when you study or teach language, you cannot ignore how gender is socially constructed and linguistically codified to most often to the exclusion of some and the benefit of some others. And so something that I've always done, and I'm now in my 14th year of teaching French language, is that the entire time that I studied French, that I studied Italian, that I studied Haitian Creole, I never one time saw a representation of a same-sex couple in a language textbook. This is hundreds and hundreds of hours. I never saw it in a book. I never had a faculty member mention it. And this is including many queer fan faculty, because French is no stranger to our family. Okay, I never saw one representation. And so I always, when I'm doing my little PowerPoints, I'm talking about reflexive and reciprocal verbs that you use to describe interaction and relationships. I always show same-sex couples. I try to do a really diverse representation of what the world actually looks like that's inclusive. I talk about how in French, even though everything is hyper-gendered in French, like this chair is feminine for some reason in French arbitrarily. I talk about how there are ways to navigate as a non-binary person in French. There is a pronoun that's not in any of the textbooks, it's yed. I have students every semester at UCA that prefer to use this pronoun, and that's what we use, and I correct their classmates so that they know they have the cultural competencies to navigate a diverse world, which is what we should be training, all of us should be training all of our students to do. So I do things like that I know from students reporting to me are very impactful. And it's impactful to the students that are not part of marginalized communities in terms of sexuality or gender, but it's also impactful to students, any students that are trying to be culturally competent individuals in the world today. And I've been told many times that that's very impactful. So that's something that I always do. I consider it reparative pedagogy in terms of I'm always having to supplement, the materials that are available to me as a language pedagogue. Conversely, I always make sure to highlight for my students that in languages like Haitian Creole, there are only gender-neutral pronouns. So, every language has its own perspective of the world, and we don't have to accept realities that are harmful. And so that's something that is really important to the way I approach language teaching. So I'll be doing the intermediate language. I'm also doing a seminar on love and beauty, which is a little hook. But that's a really fun advanced seminar in French. And then I think I'm slotted for French civilization. So that's a really broad topic. I inherited that course. It is on the books already. I like to focus on things like fashion history and theory when I'm teaching French civilization. But yeah, those are some things I'm teaching this spring, I believe. As far as research, I guess I'll highlight some of my forthcoming projects. I always have multiple things going on. One thing I have going on is a peer-reviewed article that's been accepted, and it's in final revision now for the Journal of Community Engagement and Scholarship, and it's on the UCA project. This is an oral history project that I've been building with advanced French students as well as French-speaking community members that is collecting oral histories of African immigration experience in French. A lot of people don't realize we have this vibrant and growing community of French speakers here in Central Arkansas that are of diverse national and cultural backgrounds of West and Central Africa. This is something really awesome about teaching and learning French at UCA. And we decided to build this repository that is not trauma-based in content, because the majority of oral history collections are repositories where you will find African voices being centered. It is about how they have, overcome these horrible traumatic experiences and they become kind of tropes for resilience or something like that. And this happens to queer people too. I think a lot of times it's like, tell us how you survive this extreme hostility and existential threats. And you're like, yes, I rose from that. But it's actually very draining, and it to me, I think it can be re-dehumanizing in a way. And those stories are very important to be told. I don't want to diminish their importance, but they should not be the only stories that marginalized communities have that become part of history with a big H. And so, anyway, we've been building that. To our knowledge, it is the first oral history repository of African experience of any kind in French in the U.S. that is not trauma-based and invited interview content. So, I'm publishing an article just talking about how we've been approaching that and how it's feminist, it's decolonial, and it's anti-racist. And it's also the first new oral history intakes for UCA 30 years to the year. The last intake was 1993. So we are trying to revive oral history for a more inclusive historiography at UCA and Central Arkansas. So that's one thing. Another forthcoming article I have for the Journal of Haitian Studies is co-authored with an artist who was here in residence, Fabiola Jean-Louis. She is a Haitian, New York-based artist. Her work very queerly vandalizes history and archives that are colonialist, and she did a fabulous installation here at the Baum Gallery called Waters of the Abyss that a lot of people might not have realized was all an homage to Ezili Danton, who is a lesbian queer liberational Vaudou Loire spirit that started the Haitian Revolution. So that has been a lot of fun, that project. It's partially an art historical analysis, making meaning out of the form that she brings to life in her work. And then it's also me interviewing her. It's really not interview, it's me and her in conversation, thinking about these things together. And that's collaboration is something that I really enjoy in my academic research, and that's a very feminist kind of praxis thing for me and a queer thing for me as well. Then the last project that I have forthcoming that I'll talk about is for Global 19th Century Studies, which is another, they're all international peer-reviewed articles. I have a piece that's about Catholic masculinities in the very first African-American literary anthology, which a lot of folks who even specialize in 19th century American literature don't realize was written in French by 17 Franco-Creole men of color. And so I look at what gender discourses are doing in that anthology in French. So those are, just some of my little thoughts on the fire.
I love that idea of having multiple pots in the fire, but also that emphasis on collaboration and conjunction. I mean, I always feel like, and thankfully Dr. Okoli have had more opportunities, I think, to engage directly with some of your research before, but I always appreciate some of those intersections of my own approaches and values as well with collaboration and conjunction. Also affirming, I use the word bisexual to describe myself for the same reasons that you do. So I thought that was really interesting as well. I do want to highlight, even though I wanted to interview on the panel rather than to participate kind of fully for the panel, I do want to highlight in this spring, we are offering a really special section of feminist philosophy. So it's being team taught, where it's feminist philosophy and then great works in philosophy. So I'm teaching it alongside my colleague, Dr. Benjamin Ryder, and we are going to be talking about care ethics as a response to trauma. And so we're still going to be engaging with some trauma theory. One thing that I found, in addition to this emphasis on constantly having to engage with trauma or to retell your traumatizing story that happens with so many marginalized folks, we also have really, really poor frameworks for understanding or framing that engagement with trauma within the academy. So we forget about the history of philosophy of trauma. We forget about the history of the actual psychological understandings of trauma and how those were gendered and race and sex. And we also don't really have then an appropriate kind of framework for them responding to it. We're just called on to kind of regurgitate our traumatic experiences, do trauma pornography sometimes, right, rather than actually being able to have productive conversations. And so we really wanted to focus on the importance of re-inscribing or understanding trauma as a phenomenon and then responding to it through care ethics and virtue ethics. We're going to be looking at it in the context of war. We're going to be looking at it in the context of gender violence. We're going to be looking at it in the context of gender, sex, and sexuality. And then I've got an upcoming publication that's related to that. It's a follow-up to an earlier publication I did on the book Fun Home. So I also like to use primary texts outside of philosophy to help students engage with philosophical material. And so the graphic novel Fun Home, which is an autobiography, is a really great way to introduce a lot of different concepts in the history of queer theory and sexuality to students. Covers everything from Plato to Freud to contemporary queer theory. And it's also been weaponized on college campuses. And so an earlier publication I did, which was on Fun Home and Emancipation Beyond Trigger Warnings, was about the neoliberal co-optation of the term trigger warning in order to have a weapon against using Fun Home on college campuses. So the idea was, because there was sexually explicit content, neoliberal and conservative folks were using that to say, you can't teach Fun Home. And so it was this really obviously politicized, right, usage of trigger warnings. I'm doing a follow-up to that right now about, again, revisiting the lens of trauma and having an appropriate framework to respond to trauma and to think about how Fun Home helps us to see that. It's both engaging with a personal history of traumatic experiences, but then also imagining what liberation is and looks like. And it's really a story of overcoming that as well. And so I'm working on that right now. I know that Dr. Busser had to leave us, but I wanted to see if there was anything that we wanted to end on, if there were any final thoughts that y'all had or charges for the group to be able to engage in our practice of se compé together.
I'm adding that to my vocabulary now.
And I'm about to take a sabbatical and take all of y'all's courses.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing so much. I'm really excited. I learned so much from this, and I feel really fortunate to work with y'all regularly. So I hope that other people learn a lot from it as well. Thanks.